Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Zach from RenoAstro.com and I'm an amateur astrophotographer based out of Northern Nevada. Today I wanted to go through my typical Pixinsight and Photoshop workflow with you guys and go from start to finish from raw data to a finished product of the Pleiades star cluster. This is going to be the image that we will be starting with, the stacked image, and this is hopefully going to be what we're ending with by the end of this workflow. There's a lot of tutorials online and on YouTube, but in my opinion, a lot can be a bit overwhelming for somebody who's just getting into the hobby and who just got Pixinsight. This program is tremendously useful for processing astropics, but it does have a pretty large learning curve. My goal is to walk you through my simple workflow, which doesn't get too crazy into the technicalities of Pixinsight or Photoshop. So let's go. I'm actually going to show you guys what I'll be starting with my PC specs here. Processing is definitely a bit more demanding than image acquisition, but you still don't need like a top of the line PC to do any of this. It might just take a little bit longer if you're working on some older hardware. So you can see here, I'm going to be working on my desktop PC here. Processor is a Ryzen 7 5800 X3D. I have an NVIDIA RTX 2080 for my graphics card. I do have 128 gigabytes of Corsair DDR4 RAM. I just maxed out my motherboard not too long ago, actually. You don't need this much to do any sort of this processing, but I just wanted to do that since we were having a Black Friday sale. And then for my drives, I got two solid states. I have 1 terabyte external drive, which I typically save all of my raw data to, then transfer it over to my desktop PC. And then on my desktop PC, I have a 480 gigabyte processing drive. And then I'm also going to briefly go over my image acquisition equipment as well. So for this particular image of the Pleiades, I'm going to be using my ASCAR 80p HQ flat field refractor. Main camera is a ZWO 533 MC Pro, and my guide camera was a 120mm Mini. I have an HEQ5 Pro mount, and then I also have a ZWO electronic autofocuser I used as well. General accessories here, I do have a Polemaster polar alignment camera that I use, and I put on my HEQ5 Pro. I also have a generic just dew-band heater from Amazon. I think I got it for like 20 bucks, nothing fancy. And then I do also have a ZWO off-axis guider that I use as well with my 80p HQ. So let's go ahead and get into it, starting with the modules I have opened on the right side of the screen here. From top to bottom, I have Blink, both automatic and dynamic background extractions, SCNR. I have Star Exterminator here with both histogram and curves transformations. And I also have the Noise Exterminator and Blur Exterminator plugins from RenoAstro. Finally, just one open blank instance of Pixel Math. I'll go more in depth on each of these modules as we go through the workflow, but I did want to highlight the Exterminator programs here. Noise Exterminator, Blur, and Star Exterminator. These are paid plugins, but in my opinion, they're must-haves for any Pixinsight workflow. These are some of the most useful plugins for any astropic I process and are 100% worth the cost. If you're getting serious about astrophotography and have already shelled out the money to get Pixinsight, I would say getting the RenoAstro plugins is a necessity. And you'll see why as I go through the workflow here. All right, let's go ahead and get into it then. Let's minimize both of these, and we're going to open up the first module here, Blink. This is going to be the one that you initially use to sift through all your data that you got your night of doing your image acquisition. So this button right here is just going to be to add your image files. You just go ahead and click on that. Go to wherever you stored your raw data. So here I'm using that external drive I got. This is where I store all of my raw data by date. So we're going to go ahead and go into this one here. I have all of these 300-second subs. Just going to load these in. Once they are loaded in, I like to do a quick pass through here. Hitting this play button quickly goes through all the different subs to see if there's anything out of the ordinary in any of them. And I do see towards the end right here, there's quite a few satellites passing through the center of the cluster here. I'm probably just going to get rid of that. I don't want to have to deal with that later. Once I see if there's any other abnormalities, which I don't see any, we'll go ahead and go back up to the top here. So I'll usually just kind of zoom into a part of the image here. I'll go about that far. Starting with the first one, hitting your arrow keys, you can kind of go down, go back and forth between them, see if there's any with abnormal star trails or maybe bloating that you don't want to deal with. That one right, both of those actually look kind of bad. We're going to get rid of that one. We're going to get rid of that one as well. And once you select any that you don't want, make sure to just highlight it. And then right here is this close selected image. Get rid of those. So go back up to the top, we'll go back through. I'm gonna go back through to a different section of the image, see if there's anything else that we can see going through these. Oh, yeah, right there. That doesn't look too good. And I'm looking right about here at these group of stars. That's what I'm focusing on. Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep what we got here, just do one more zoom out, play through it. I'm gonna just go ahead and Control A inside of this box, so that way it highlights all of the subs that I selected. And then you're gonna go ahead and click on this Copy Selected Files button here. So this is also where I save all of my selected data too, and this is the 480 gigabyte solid state that I got. So I go into my nebulae section, Pleiades. I made a folder here, just Pixinsight workflow. I'll typically name these, whatever filter I use, whether it was, just general RGB or if I used a duoband filter. This one I just did straight RGB, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And it will copy all of those selected subs into that folder. So now we can go ahead and just close this, minimize blink, and we are going to go up to the top toolbar here, go to Script, Batch Processing, and Weighted Batch Pre-Processing. And once this opens, I'm going to go ahead and clear everything I got in here. So it should be empty when you go ahead and start adding your data to it. So go ahead and click on Lights, and we're going to go to where we just saved all of our chosen sub-exposures. So go to Nebula, Pleiades, there we go, and then just Control A again. It's going to go ahead and throw all of those into this pre-processing script here. And then also make sure not to forget your flats and other calibration frames. Those are also very important when going through and making a good astro pick. I have all of my saved here. I got dark flats and then normal flats here. And if you do have dark flats, I always just generally throw those in under the bias section, and you'll see why here in just a moment. So we'll get those in, and finally our darks. I do have a darks library here because I generally shoot at the same temperatures. I believe this is actually -15. Yep, same temperatures on the same camera. So I will update these every few months or so, but generally I have this library here. It makes it nice and easy. So going back up to the calibration tab here, I'll make this a bit bigger. Going to go ahead and select our light frames. So I'm using a color camera. So if you are using a color camera, make sure to use this CFA images box here. I know my mosaic pattern, which is RGGB. If you don't know it, you can always just leave it on auto and it'll be able to figure it out. But I always just like to select it since I know what it is. I always hit apply to all light frames. Next, go over to your flats, and same thing with this one. Make sure to check that CFA images there, apply to all flat frames. And now we can see here that we have our flats connected to our lights, and same thing with our darks. Now the biases are going to go onto the flat frame. So this is going to get rid of any hot pixels within the flat frames and get calibrated out at the end. So notice how we're not using any darks for these flats. It's only pulling from these biases, and the lights are pulling from both the darks and the flats. Now that we have that selected, everything looks good. I don't see any exclamation bars here. I always go to presets as well. I like using the maximum quality with no compromises. I always select it before I start processing, even though I know it probably stays there, but I always click it, make sure that that is the one selected. And I always do purge the cache right here as well, pretty regularly, so that way we can just keep that nice and clear. Once we have all of our frames in, we have all of our selected frames, flats, darks, biases, we can go ahead and hit this run at the bottom right. It'll tell you exactly how much working space is required as well out of how much you have available, so always pay attention to that. Make sure that you have enough space on your drive. If you're all good there, go ahead and just hit continue and let it do its thing. I will see you guys here in just a moment when it's all finished processing. All right, and we are all finished here with the weighted batch pre-processing script. You can see there's a success on everything. If you do see any status other than success, you might want to go back and take a look whether it was debayer or bad frames rejection. Generally though, I don't think I've ever ran into issues with this guy right here. So go ahead and I'm going to close that. Hit done. We don't need this open anymore. And what you're going to want to do is go up to the top left here, hit File and Open. I have mine set to open in the master folder where all of my stacked images go. You can set this to wherever you want to be, but I have this set up on my solid state dedicated to the astronomy drive here. We'll go to the most recent files, which is going to be these two. Now I choose not to open the auto crop one. If I do want to crop it, I like to have a little bit more control over it. So I just choose to open the non-cropped version. And you can see here a few different windows opened up. Starting with this one, we'll go ahead and click on this top right button, kind of with this radiation-like symbol. It's an auto stretch feature. Go ahead and click that. And you can actually see a lot of the satellites that I was picking up in the individual subs actually got processed out, which is going to be really nice. We don't have to deal with those. But we don't need this box open, so we can close that. And same thing with this one, we can go ahead and close this. The one that you want to keep open is generally going to be the one that you see with any amount of stars in it. So this is our final stacked image here. You can see a lot of black, just a few stars in here, but let's go ahead and auto stretch it. And we can see we have all this beautiful data of the Pleiades star cluster in here in this stacked image. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this. If you click on this little side handbar on the left side, you double click it, you can actually give it a unique identifier so you don't lose and mix up what your images are. So I'm just going to go ahead and title this Original. And I always like to just make copies of things so that way I can go back in case I messed up any of the processing. So if you again click and hold on that right there, you can drag it to wherever you want, and that creates a clone of that image. So I'm going to go back to the original, minimize that. I'm just going to go ahead and throw it somewhere over there so I can go back to it if needed. And now I will have this image that I'll be working with. Let's go to the modules now on the right hand side. So I always actually start with Star Exterminator. This is going to be important for processing the stars and the nebulosity separately, since you can get quite a bit more control and really get it how you want it to look if you separate the two right from the get-go. So opening up this module here, you can see these down at the bottom. We have this little triangle and then we have a square. With the Star Exterminator module here, we're going to go ahead and click and hold on this triangle there. You can see we now have a new instance of Star Exterminator. We're just going to drop it right on that image there. So it's going to take a second to load depending on your PC hardware. It can vary if it's quick or fast. I do have GPU acceleration on, so generally it's a bit quicker. Going through it pretty quickly right there, you can see. And now, go ahead and minimize Star Exterminator. You can see we have two images, one of the stars and one of the nebula. I'm going to go ahead, again, rename these. We'll do this one Stars and this one Starless. And I'm not going to worry about the stars right now. I'm just going to go ahead and minimize that, throw it off to the side. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to open up Automatic Background Extractor. And this is just kind of like an initial feel so we can see what type of nebulosity we got after getting rid of the background. But it's not super accurate, so we will move over to Dynamic here in just a moment. But first, we're going to go ahead and click on this Target Image Correction. Do subtraction on that drop-down, and I always select this Disregard Background model. Similar to Star Exterminator, we're going to go ahead and just click on that triangle and drag it over here. This doesn't take too long. You can see it's a pretty quick process there. And now, let's minimize that, put these side by side. Left-hand side is with the background in, and let's stretch this out now. So this is what it looks like, and it gives you a pretty good idea of the nebulosity that you got here. So obviously a lot in the center here, a lot right here, kind of going out towards the middle left and right hand side, making that V shape. Not a whole lot on this upper area right here, and a little bit on the bottom left and right hand corners. So this is just to get an idea of what you're working with here before you go into the dynamic background extractor. Let's use this starless image right here with the automatic background extractor as a reference. So once you have dynamic background extraction open, go ahead and click on this left image here. And what I like to do is go under sample generation. I always kind of make it between 12 to 15 samples per row. We'll do 12 today. And then this tolerance, I crank all the way up to 10. Once we hit generate, we'll see the reason why I do that is because it pretty much lays out a really good grid pattern, just nice and even across the entire screen. I'm sure there are easier ways to do this, but I prefer this way just so that way I can just go back and get rid of the samples that I don't want. And the ones that you don't want are going to be the ones right here in the middle that are pretty much right over the nebula. Now, before we go ahead and get rid of those, again, we're going to go to Target Image Correction. And under the drop down, we'll do subtraction and disregard that background model. So now this arrow will bring you all the way over to the end. So you can see that little sample in the green right there is highlighted. And we can kind of sift through and get rid of the ones that we don't want. So you can actually overlay this and see where the nebulosity actually is going to be. So I'm going to keep all the samples on that right hand side. We're gonna go, and it's right about there. Actually, I'm gonna go starting there. So yeah, I'm gonna get rid of these 3 samples, and you can just get rid of it by hitting this X here. It just gets rid of it and deletes it through there. So we can see that's pretty much directly over the nebula. I'll get rid of those 2 as well. And yeah, just finish this up. Gonna go through the entire image here, so that way we can get a good estimation on what that background actually is. So I will see you guys here in just a minute when I finish getting rid of these samples here. All right, and we are all finished with this. As you can see, I got rid of quite a bit of these samples here. Doing an overlay, we can kind of see a lot of that nebulosity is going to be in the center kind of cross area, and then a little bit more on the bottom left. So you can see, yeah, I cleared all of this area out. And I also noticed, caught a little galaxy in the background here. I'm going to have to look up which one that one is. Might be a handful, actually. I see a little dot up here too, although that might just be an artifact. But this one definitely looks like a galaxy. So just something I wanted to point out. But now let's go ahead and get this background extraction. So same thing as before, click the little triangle, drag it over. And now we have our background extracted image. We'll go ahead and stretch that. And yeah, it looks very similar, but you can see a lot of like these kind of odd splotchy areas that were in the automatic background extraction, kind of odd gradients on the side. Those are a lot more smoothed out in the dynamic background extraction. So it gives you a bit more control on getting that background out of there and just getting a much more flat image like that. So that is all I use the automatic background extraction for. So we can go ahead and actually close that, and then we can just minimize that or close the dynamic background extraction as well. We no longer need the one with the background. I'm gonna go ahead and throw that just anywhere over here. And now the starless DBE image is gonna be the one that we're gonna work with moving forward. So going down here, usually I'm gonna just pop open this SCNR. I keep this on its default settings, so I keep this to green and average neutral. I'm gonna drag that over. And what this does is that it's actually getting rid of some of that extra green noise from a lot of color cameras. Since there are 2 green pixels to every single red and blue, oftentimes there's a bit more green in your images. So this just kind of helps get rid of that extra green in there. Once we put that SCNR in, we will now go ahead and start with our histogram transformations. So we are still in an auto stretch here. We're gonna actually get out of that by clicking on this reset button there. and gonna open up histogram transformations. Now under this drop down, make sure that you select the image that we're gonna be working with. So this one is going to be our starless DBE. We get a nice histogram model here. Click on this little hollow circle as well. This gives you a preview on the changes that we're gonna be making before we actually apply them to the image. So we will go ahead and adjust this histogram right here on this bottom window. You can see we have 3 arrows. We got one on the far right hand side, one on the far left, and then one in the middle here. We're gonna start with the middle, drag it a little bit to the left here, and you can see as we change this, the top histogram model is adjusting with it. So I like to keep my data around the quarter mark, and this left-hand arrow is going to adjust our blacks. So we want to get these curves pretty much right to the edge, the left-hand edge of this, without clipping any of the data. And clipping the data is just bringing it too far this way, and we just lose a lot of valuable information. So we want to make sure to not do that. So I'm going to go right about there and click on this square. Now that applied it to the original image we were working on, and this preview window, we're just going to go ahead and reset it. So the bottom right hand reset button there. Now we can just keep going and stretching it to how we like it done. So I am noticing these aren't exactly lined up, so we can actually go individually through the red, green, and blue channels. It's always good to get the peaks of the histograms kind of lined up centrally here, and they're just a little bit off. So I'm going to adjust this red one just a hair to the left, and same thing with the green, except a hair to the right. And that just balances out the colors a bit better, so that way it's going to look as it should with all of these in line with one another. So now we can actually go back to the RGB. So we're doing all of them again. Gonna bring that over just a little bit more. Gonna stretch this out to about the quarter mark. That looks good. Let's go ahead and apply that. And again, we'll reset. And you know, I'm happy with this. I'm happy with the way this currently looks as it's stretched out. So let's go ahead and minimize our histogram. We can close out our preview window, and now we are left with our, again, our starless image in a little bit more stretched format. Next, let's go ahead and go to a curves transformation window. And again, let's go ahead and make sure to click on that real-time preview button, so that way we can actually take a look and see what our adjustments are doing before we make any actual applications of it. For the curves transformations, I like to do a nice soft S pattern here. Gives us a bit more contrast while really making the rest of the nebula pop. So that's a little much. Gonna ease up on the bottom there. Gonna bring that one. Yeah, that looks, let's go right about there. So now before we apply, let's just kind of compare. So this is the changes that we're anticipating on making, and this is the original image. We can see a lot more of this. It brings out a lot more of that blue color. We want to make sure not to really blow out these super bright sections here. So let's actually bring this back that way a bit. The higher you go up this way, the more the highlights are going to be impacted. So we'll go ahead and bring it down that way. Yeah, that looks good right there. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. And we can see over here, we just applied all of those curves. We're gonna reset it. I don't think I'm gonna make any more curves adjustments, but let's just kind of play around with it, see what it'll look like if we do it again. Yeah, that just looks a bit overblown there. So I'm not gonna worry about doing any more curves. If anything, I'll just stretch it out a little bit more to give it a little extra brightness. But for the curves transformations, I am happy with that. So close that preview, and now here is our image. So this is where I start using the RenoAstro plugins. So you can see there's a lot of noise in here, pretty much all around the image, on everywhere, on the corners, throughout the center. This noise exterminator helps soften and get rid of a lot of that. I always have it set to its defaults, meaning the denoise at 0.90 and detail at 0.15, but you can adjust these as you see fit. You can just make a few copies, bring it over, and whatever makes you happy, stick with that. But generally, I like to stick with the default on this noise exterminator here at 0.9 and 0.15. So let's bring this over. This one is generally pretty quick. Noise exterminators, fairly quick process, but the blur exterminator is where it really starts to amp up. So already finished here, and you can see I'm just gonna go back and forth between the before and after. And you can see that is a huge difference on noise that we have in our image. Now it does soften these areas, right? So we are losing a little bit of detail in this, but overall, in every part of the image, it's going to really lessen a lot of that noise. And we can start to see the finer details of this nebula a little bit better. So I always like to keep it at its defaults there. And before we go to the blur exterminator here, we're actually going to go back to our stars image. So now we're going to start processing these stars. We can minimize our star list. And right now it's still in an auto stretch format. So we're going to get rid of that. And now this is just a linear image of the stars. Very similar to what we did with the curves and histogram transformation on the star lists. We're going to now do it on the stars. So again, make sure that you select stars under your dropdown. Make sure that real-time preview is up. Let's just bring this middle arrow over to the left. Start to get those stars brightened up. We're going to reset that after applying. And again, bring it over. Now, right about there looks good. Reset. So let's do, I'm happy with right about here. We'll apply that and reset it. Close our histograms, and now we have our stretched stars. I don't think we're going to make any curves adjustments, but again, let's see what happens when, I don't really like the way that makes these stars look there, even if, it just kind of bloats them up. We'll go ahead and just leave it as is. Let's not make any adjustments using the curves transformation, but now we have stretched stars and stretched starless. So now we're going to want to combine these. To do that, we're going to use pixel math. It's not a really complicated formula. I've memorized this by now. But what you'll want to do is just type in combine, and then you'll want to do a parenthesis, starless underscore DBE, comma, stars, comma, and then you'll type in OP underscore screen. And that in of itself is a function. So you'll want to do a start and end parenthesis after that, and then one more end parenthesis to capture the combine function. So now we'll go ahead and just click on stars here and click on that apply. So now you can see we just merged the two. Now we have a stars and a starless image in one again. Just to minimize that, we can bring it over there. Now we will be working with this image here. This is the final module I'll be using called Blur Exterminator. Let's reset that back to its defaults. The reason why we want to merge these before using Blur Exterminator is because of this automatic PSF option here. So right here, this just helps kind of determine a certain pixel value that it's going to be making the adjustments with. And you can see here with that checked at the top, it says it determines the non-stellar PSF automatically from the stars in the image. So it uses those stars in order to calculate this value for the function that it's about to run on it. So I always like to merge them back up before I run this module. I do like my stars a bit sharper, so I'm going to go ahead and put this up to 0.60. And let's go ahead and keep the rest as default. So the non-stellar is going to be at 0.50 and none of this selected. I'm going to make just a few previews of different values of this non-stellar. So this is the original, and you can see when I clicked and dragged down, we can have previews of the same image with different values that we're going to put on. So let's go to preview 1 and just click and drag that over. All right, and once that is finished, you can see the stars got quite a bit sharper. So I'm going to go back and forth between the normal and the preview, normal and preview. So yeah, a lot of these smaller stars over here definitely got a bit sharper. You can see they're pretty blurry on this one and look a little bit better on this. So I prefer to keep my sharpened stars value at 0.60. I just like the way that it looks without really messing up any of these larger stars here. Now let's just zoom into this section right here. We can kind of get a lot of the nebulosity in here. Do the same on the original. And let's just kind of compare and see what it looks like. So a bit blurry on this little arc right here. It does bring out a bit more detail using the blur exterminator. Same thing with this area right up here. It's pretty blurry in the original. On the preview, a little bit less so. So now let's go ahead, zoom back out on both. Let's go to preview number 2 now. And let's bring this up to, I'm not sure, let's do 0.7 from 0.5 and see how that looks. All right, so now we are at 0.7. Zoom back in. Now let's go back and forth between the original and preview 2. Yeah, so it is bringing out quite a bit more of this detail right here. Not so much on the arc. This looks pretty similar. What about over here? All right, yeah, you can see right around here, brings out a bit more detail, a little bit more clarity than in the original. And we'll do one more preview here. Let's just bring this, let's just try 0.90, see how that looks. That might be a little bit too much sharpening, but just for the sake of trying and comparing, let's go ahead and put that on there. All right, so now we are at 0.90 and the original. All right, yeah, that actually doesn't look too bad. There's a little bit of artifacts over there, but generally it doesn't, unless you zoom way in, you can't really notice. All right, so I'm actually, I think, the most satisfied with preview 2 here. I believe that was 0.70 for the non-stellar sharpening. So we're gonna go ahead and just close preview 3, actually just close all of them. So we're left with the original here. I got my stars at 0.6, non-stellar at 0.7, and we will go ahead and let that be our final image there. There we go, there's blur exterminator done, and we have already a pretty good image of Pleiades just using Pixinsight here. But I am gonna bring this over to Photoshop so we could do some final tweaks and make sure that we are truly happy with our image. Let's go ahead and just file. We're gonna save this as a TIFF. I'll throw it on my desktop, M45, save that, and then make sure to, if you're saving it as a TIFF, bring it to 16-bit unsigned integer right there. It just works the best with Photoshop in my experience. So once you select that, you can click on OK. And now we will go ahead and transition over to Photoshop. All right, so now we moved this over to Photoshop. I am going to first just start with a quick crop. I'm gonna center this. I'm good with that. So do a quick crop, and let's also just bring this and bring it up like that. I do prefer it the other orientation like this. So once you get the orientation and crop how you prefer, now we're going to do one more thing, and we're going to separate the stars again. The RenoAstro plugins also transition over to Photoshop, which is really nice. So I have a few of the RenoAstros, but typically I'm just going to be using this star exterminator again here. Before we do that, we will duplicate this layer 2 times. So now we have 3 copies of this, and we will select the top copy, go up to filter and star exterminator. Just go ahead and click on OK, let it do its thing, and it is finished. So we just removed the stars from that uppermost layer there. So now we will again right click on the starless image and duplicate that layer again. Bring that in between the original copy and the background. So it should be in order. We got stars, starless, stars, and starless. So in order to get a nice image of just our stars, we will want to invert this top background copy. And to do that, you just hold Control-I. We will also invert this background copy underneath of it with the stars still. So Control-I on this one as well. And on the top layer, we will want to change the blend mode to divide. So now you can kind of see we have a lot of our stars in this image here. We will highlight these top 2 inverted layers right here. We are going to merge those by hitting Control-E. And again, we will invert it back, and we have our stars. With this, we can deselect our background image and actually set this top one to screen. There it is. So we can see if we deselect that, we have starless and stars. So we can deselect that as we see fit and also process them both individually, just like we were doing in Pixinsight. Let's go ahead and do some additional tweaks to the starless here. I'm gonna go up to adjustments and levels one more time. You can see here there is a little bit more room before we start clipping some data. So let's just bring it up to 12 there. Yeah, I do like the way that looks a bit better. Now we are also going to go to our color balance. So I'm going to click on that and then shadows. It is a pretty blue hue, considering it is a blue reflection nebula. So let's actually bring that down and see how that affects the image. And you can always go to this little eye here to turn on and off the adjustments that you just made. So just kind of going back and forth, that brings it a little greener. Bring down the green a tiny bit, and even the red, see what it looks like. Just a small change, but it does look a little bit better. It's not as blue in these darker sections here where it's supposed to be black space. So that looks good to me. I'm gonna go ahead and just keep that. And something else I see here, we got these kind of weird, odd, I don't know what to call those. They're not artifacts, but it's very blurry and it just does not look natural right about here. So we're gonna go select the starless. We're going to go up to the top left, hit select, color range. Let's go ahead and click right about, let's do here. So once we click that area of the image, we're going to be selecting the fuzziness level. And you can see as we adjust this slider here, this white is what's actually going to be selected when we hit OK. So I don't want to select a ton of the image, but I do want to get these kind of outlier regions over here. So let's go right about, let's do 20. And we can see we have a lot of this area selected over here. So now I'm actually going to go click on this vibrance right here, bring this to the top, see if we can get that a little bit better or less saturated. So let's bring that down to 40 and saturation down to 30. So yeah, we can see a lot of this right here, which could very well be camera noise. It eliminates that. So it looks a little bit flatter, a little bit less of a gradient. Bring the stars back. Yeah, I'm happy with the way that this looks. So now, just a few more tweaks here. I'm gonna go to hue and saturation. Let's do blues. So I'm gonna just kind of wiggle this around, see, yeah, so it's gonna be most of the image there, which is exactly what I want. So I only want to increase the saturation a bit on the nebula here without affecting these black areas. So I'm going to just select blues. That's a little too saturated. Let's maybe do 8. A little bit more blue right there for sure. Go back up to adjustments and then one more time go to vibrance, bring this up a tiny bit to, let's do 20. Really brings out the blue in this nebula right here. That looks pretty good to me. For one more thing, let's just see what the brightness will look like if we start adjusting this. Again, don't want to blow out these really bright areas right here, but I do want to make sure that it looks good when I end up posting this over to Instagram or YouTube or wherever I'm going to be posting this, right? Typically on screens, you're going to want to just increase the brightness a bit more to make it look a little bit better on like a cell phone. That's good. I feel like that gives it a little bit of an extra pop without really blowing out these areas really too much. Yeah, that looks good to me. Yeah, and that's pretty much it, you guys. That's going to be my entire workflow for Pixinsight and Photoshop. I feel like it's not super complicated like some of the other ones that you see on YouTube. I'm only using a handful of modules here, as opposed to everything that's really in Pixinsight. Now I'm sure a lot of these have their own use cases, but for a beginner and for the learning curve of this program, I feel like it's good to kind of take it slow and get into the groove of something that you're familiar with. And this is really what I've fallen into the groove of for almost 2 years now, and it has not let me down since. And if you have any feedback for me, feel free to throw it into the comments as well. I'd like to hear from you guys if there's anything that you guys would like to see from me in the future. I plan on uploading a little bit more regularly, so just let me know if there's anything in particular you guys would like to see. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.